Good morning, all. Welcome to History with R&R live. How are you doing, Jeff?
Hanging in there.
So I decided to go with the short one this morning instead of the 2 minute and something. Uh, so we'll take a quick spin through chat before we welcome up our guests this morning. So we have, starting it all off, was Orville Nation. If you're still out in the chat, good morning. Mark the Infly Tired. Of course, Mrs. Canuck is in chat. Good morning, my love. We have John DiMarco. We have Jordan. We have Thomas Potts, of course. I've got to get into Minecraft today at some point. 47 Yorktown. And Berta Prey 5. And ICU. Good morning. All right, so this morning we're going to welcome our guests and we'll let them introduce the topic. So first of all, welcoming back to the show, John DiMarco.
Hello.
And joining him this morning, Life with Matthew. How are we doing this morning, gentlemen?
Fine, thanks.
Fine, thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen.
All right, so I will let you two decide who's going to go first and introduce the topic.
You want to go first, Matthew?
Well, sure. So, gosh,
They came
how long
prepared.
Ago? Yeah, totally prepared. It's funny. I don't see my little voice thing going around my picture. Do I have audio
you're
problems?
good.
Can you all hear me?
No,
Okay.
I can see it. You're working fine.
Okay, fine, good. I was like, oh, come on. We had this working, and now it's not. Well, I'd hardly be on a stream without audio issues.
Okay.
So, it was several months ago, back in September, I want to say, we were talking about Juneteenth, because that's a big deal in Texas these days. Juneteenth. No one really celebrates it, but it's a federal holiday, and that kind of triggered me in the conversation. We had a good laugh about that at my expense, but I was annoyed by how many people think that Juneteenth is like when all the slaves were freed. It's the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. It's like, well, no, that's not what it is at all. Mm-hmm. And so that got us on to the larger subject of the Civil War and kind of what caused it, and a lot of the misunderstandings about the Civil War and what the heck it was even fought for.
Yeah.
That's my quick cliff notes of the subject as we get into it.
Yes.
John, did you want to add anything?
You could give a pretty good summary, but you're talking about things like not only was Juneteenth not have anything to do with the Emancipation Proclamation, it's not when all the slaves were freed anyway, because that was officially done with the 13th Amendment, which was ratified, several months later.
Yeah,
and it's sad. It's not like it was French people who think this. Geraldo was up on TV talking about, oh yeah, Juneteenth is when this document was signed. And said, well, no, it wasn't at all. Come on, Geraldo, you should know better than this.
Why would we let facts get in the way of a good story? Jeez.
Seriously.
I know, I'm weird.
Isn't Geraldo a trained professional reporter?
He is. He used to be like the source of information.
I don't know about the source, but okay.
Maybe
A
Kuroga.
source.
Maybe in Kuroga.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe in Kuroga. I mean, like, he was such a famous figure for, you watch Geraldo and you get such accurate information. Like, he was a hard-hitting journalist back in the day.
Yeah. But they've all gone to the whatever the network is pumping out this week.
They're going to the dark side.
Yeah. I mean, even like I've discussed before, to my angerment, even modern historians now, it changes with the day of the week, what a historic event can be remembered as. Just going with the question, was it a good thing that Stalin got rid of all of his generals? You'll have every opinion from, no, that was the dumbest thing he ever did, to, no, it was the greatest thing he ever did for the Russian military. So yeah, I can understand.
So John, how far back do you have your notes going for, like, kind of what brought about the Civil War?
Well, I was just thinking about in general. I don't have specific notes about how it was basically an argument. On the South, they would say it was for states' rights, and in the North, they would say it was to preserve the Union. That either side in the initial parts of the war would have said that the war was about slavery.
Yeah, and I guess I'd say notes. I'm a horrible note taker, so I don't really have much in front of me. But the Civil War is such a crazy complicated topic, and it's obviously a hot topic because slavery was tied up so much into it, especially at the time. Like that was the political issue of the election. What was the role of slavery within the Union? And leading up to that, we had a lot of little flashpoints that just added and added on to things, like the 3/5 compromise. That was a big debate between the South and North, because the South said, well, we want to count the slaves as part of our population. And it's not that necessarily they cared about their slaves. Unless we think too highly of the South for being like, oh, so the North didn't want to count black people, but slaves did. It's that the South wanted that representation within Congress.
Yeah.
That the population would give. And the North said, no. We don't want you to have that much power because we don't like the things you're pushing for.
Yeah. You would disturb the great balance of we have majority, bite me.
Yeah. And then you had more things like, was it the Missouri Compromise or I think it was the Missouri Compromise, but all these things added up to the hot topic. And one of the true kind of grinding points that I think really tipped things over the scale were the Lincoln Douglas kind of debates and the things they chose to focus on, which obviously was going to be slavery within these debates. Okay. And people get the idea like, oh, you had Stephen Douglas, who he was arguing for slavery. He must have been, because you had Lincoln and he was arguing against slavery. And neither one of those statements are true. Those are both false statements.
Minor technicality.
Yeah, so Lincoln was not a strict abolitionist. He did want to see slavery come to a conclusion, but he thought that black people shouldn't be in America at all. He wanted to get rid of all black people from America and send them back to Africa.
Yeah.
Whereas Douglas was an abolitionist. Like, when you talk to him in his private life, he was very much against slavery. He thought it was morally wrong. But he was also an extreme proponent of, ironically, state rights. And he argued that each state should be the one in charge of dictating their own rules, that it was not a federal issue. It was a states' right issue. And so he believed that we should, within each state, be moving away from slavery, as they had done in Britain at this point. I believe it was 1833 when the UK did an official end to slavery, and they actually paid slave owners, said, okay, we recognize that slavery is your property, therefore we, the government, are buying the slaves off you, and we are ending slavery. And then France did it, I want to say a decade later, in 1840s, maybe 1838. What am I, a historian? No. I'm a programmer of poop water. But so you had them doing that, and that's what we were moving to within America when things kind of exploded and we had the Civil War. So Douglas very much actually did want an end to slavery. And the fact that in school we're taught that Lincoln and Douglas debated each other over slavery, and Lincoln was trying to end slavery and Douglas was trying to keep it going, is that's the beginning of, we have rewritten history.
Yeah.
To make the Civil War seem more noble than it was.
Well, in a lot of ways, Lincoln's history was rewritten the day that a bullet was fired.
True. I mean, it's harsh, but it's very true. And for even more recent in history, Kennedy, in much the same way. a lot of his history was rewritten
when a
he was-
bullet was fired.
And Princess Diana, a lot of her history was rewritten when she died in the car crash. Which there's a lot of people who are probably okay with me talking about Kennedy and Lincoln, but are ready to get the pitchfork out whenever I talk about Diana.
Yeah, what I read about Lincoln, he was a very astute politician. And if we get back into the Emancipation Proclamation in particular, that I believe it was a very clever political move, not because necessarily Lincoln was an abolitionist, because he wasn't, as you said. But the South had been courting the European powers like Europe, like France and England, who had already abolished slavery many years earlier. But Lincoln knew that by, quote unquote, making the war about slavery, that those European powers would never go in and support the Confederacy, which was a big deal because it was European support, like from France, for example, that was key in helping the United States win the Revolutionary War against Britain.
Yes.
Yeah, and on that, John, people often view the Emancipation Proclamation as like, oh, this was the end of slavery, when it was only the North proclaiming that the slaves in the South were free.
Yeah.
Interesting how that worked.
and ironically, there were slaves in the North all throughout the Civil War.
Yes, there were four border states that never left the Union. It was Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. They had slaves throughout the war.
So Lincoln's proclamation did not free those slaves in the northern states because Lincoln was worried about losing the support of those states. Like he was worried, like, hey, if I slay the slaves in the North, they might defect. They might say, whoa, we are not okay with what you're doing. And he was already, I believe you just said this, John, Lincoln was losing bad in the Civil War. The North was in an extremely desperate stance at this point, and he needed something to bring about a political victory and rally the troops.
Mm-hmm.
And he latched onto the concept of it being slavery. And with the Emancipation Proclamation, it really changed the focus and the narrative of the Civil War.
Yeah. Did you want me to bring that up, John?
If you don't mind.
Yep, no problem.
This is a map showing the areas in red that were subject to the Emancipation Proclamation. But in blue, you have the Union-controlled areas. There's the four border states, like I mentioned. And also, by this point in the war, Tennessee had largely been returned to Union control, plus they had captured the area around New Orleans. So all those areas were exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation. Because like you said, Lincoln didn't want to lose the people that were still loyal to the Union. Also, you can see West Virginia, which at about this time had seceded for Virginia.
When did that happen, John? West Virginia.
West Virginia. I believe it was in early 1863.
Okay.
And the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect on January 1st, 1863.
So basically, he needed a rallying point, and he just decided, well, a lot of people have this problem, so we'll just rally against that. We'll change the narrative that's what the war is about, and then we'll be good to go. In short.
And in short, yeah. And the reason he was able to pick this out is because slavery was very much, while the Civil War wasn't about slavery was a large factor of the Civil War. Leading up to the Civil War, obviously, you had the debates, and you had people on one end, like Frederick Douglass, who was an extreme abolitionist, which, I mean, he was a black man. Obviously, he's saying, yeah, I don't want to be a slave.
It's,
it makes sense. He's right morally, of course.
Yes.
But obviously, I mean, it'd be like, yeah, we're going to make anyone who is between 5 and 6 feet a slave. I'd be like, hey, you know what? I have a problem with this. That's my demographic right there.
Yeah. It's like, wait, well, hold up.
So you did have the extreme end of abolition, where they were calling for an immediate cessation to slavery. Everyone's immediately free, no compensation. And then you had the extreme other end of the political spectrum who said, no, we actually need to ratify into the Constitution the sovereign right for slavery.
Yeah.
And so you had this hot topic thing going on. And then Lincoln did get elected. And in modern history books, people will say when Lincoln was elected, the South saw that Lincoln was going to free the slaves, which he never was going to do. But the South saw that, and therefore they seceded. And that's false. That's so patently false because, one, Lincoln was not a strong abolitionist. He did think slavery should end. He thought they should be kicked out of America. But that was not something he was going to rapidly do, and no one thought he was rapidly going to do it. That's just something we've done in modern history.
Yeah, we retrospectively we've gone back and
yeah, but
changed it.
When he was elected, there was an extreme concern that he was going to overtax the South, because that was one of his talking points, that the South needed to be charged more in taxation. And there was kind of a war that had happened not too far ago, maybe 75-ish years, I think it was, before the Civil War, in which some Americans kind of got uppity about tax. I don't know. It was some minor thing, I'm sure.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah, vaguely familiar. Yeah.
Not quite sure.
So that was a concern, and there was a growing concern over, like, tied up into that. So it was tied up into what was the federal government allowed to tax, how were they allowed to impose taxes, and then tied up into that was the issue of slavery, because one of the taxes being proposed was a up to $10 a head tax on slaves being imported into the Americas. And so this is why the Civil War is such a muddy and complex topic, because at the heart of so many state right issues was slavery as they were dealing with this. And so it was very easy to go, well, because you're talking about taxation, well, what were they upset about? Among many things, taxation on slaves. Well, therefore, it was about slavery. No, it was just a factor.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed Birdo Pray 5 in the chat says end slavery or tax slavery to death. Seems about the same thing.
Could be. I mean, were they trying to end slavery through taxation? That's how we teach it today. I'm not convinced that was the mindset of the time.
Well, I mean, you can go to modern times to see how well that would have worked. Just on the premise of, well, we're going to get everybody to quit smoking by raising the cost of smoking.
Right. I mean, that's clearly had such a monumental success.
Yeah. Nobody smokes anymore, don't you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Minor detail.
Well, to some extent, I think that has worked.
To some extent, but not complete eradication.
No, and you're never going to completely get rid of it.
No.
I personally would say that the thought of we can end slavery through taxation, I think that there were people who believed that, and we can see that in their writings. There are absolutely people who thought this would be a means to discourage it. I also know that we had made some purchases recently as the federal government, some very expensive purchases that we needed desperately to pay off. The purchase in which we got California springs to mind. Which, I mean, that was also one of those hot topic issues. California crossed the Mason-Dixon line. So was California going to be a free state or was it going to be a slave state?
Yeah.
And they ultimately decided that California was going to be free, but the other states purchased, was it Arizona, Nevada, and something else, were going to be slave states to keep things balanced.
Okay.
So the federal government was doing a lot of things and it needed money. So there were some people like, hey, we can do this to end slavery. And there are other people like, hey, we can do this to get more cash. And in both cases, it ended up being something that really set the stage for the South to leave.
Yeah.
And the South did leave. They didn't like the taxation. They didn't like the fact that the North was trying to take control of what they thought was a state right. And they left. And so, and they left actually before Lincoln was elected. It was Buchanan, I believe, was the president just before Lincoln. And several states had already seceded prior to him. And it was once Lincoln was elected, the first thing he did at that time was send reinforcements to, or not reinforcement, he tried to send supplies to Fort Sumter. So the South had seceded, and one of the big issues was there was a fort right in the mouth of, what's the river in South Carolina? Do you remember the name of it, John?
Charleston, I believe.
Thank you. The Charleston River, and it was the main ingress for shipping. So it was a very strategical fort, and the North had possession of it. And the South very much wanted them to give up secession. They said, no, this is our fort. This is our waters. You need to give it up. And the North did not want to. And so they tried to resupply it several times. They tried to use merchant ships. The South found out each time, and they were able to stop it from being resupplied. So it was turning rapidly into a siege situation. So Lincoln comes in. And the first thing he does is he looks at the situation. He says, I'm going to send a letter to the governor of South Carolina and tell him I'm sending resupplies. And they saw this and they said, you know what, we have to take immediate action. And that is when they shot on Fort Sumter. They said, we need to end this situation now. The South actually sent a reply back saying, no, you're not resupplying. You're going to withdraw your troops. And Lincoln said no. Or technically it was the general. I'm not sure how involved Lincoln was at this point. We hardly had instant communication in those days.
Yeah.
So people really like, well, the South fired the shot. And it's like, well, yeah, the South fired the shot, but the North was pushing the aggression at the same time. There was a major concern that had Lincoln been able to send the supplies to Fort Sumter and the troops, that would have cut off their own supplies. And so Lincoln very much took up an aggressive stance against the South, and the South responded in kind.
Yeah.
Which is just another example of what was the crux of the disagreement at the beginning of the war. It was the South Carolina, for example, think they had rights to that, whereas Lincoln's like, no, the federal government does. So they see it as, the South saw it as the federal government encroaching on their authority. But ultimately, their freedom, so to speak, to leave the Union if they so chose, which of course the North disagreed with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Another issue.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Another thing, let's see, when it came to the Emancipation Proclamation, a lot of people in the South, and some in the North as well, saw this as another example of the federal government, adopting too much authority. A lot of people questioned the ability of Lincoln as the president to basically unilaterally issue this proclamation. Like he didn't send it through Congress or anything like that. He basically like an executive order. And there was a faction of the Democratic Party in the North called the Copperheads, who were very much against Lincoln for this. And in general, they wanted to just, secure peace with the Confederacy instead of fighting them.
Yeah.
And when at about the same time period, Lincoln suspended the right of habeas corpus for political prisoners, which was basically the right to be, if you arrest somebody, you have to bring them to trial. You can't just leave them locked up indefinitely.
Yeah.
So a lot of people saw the combination of these two things as basically Lincoln is taking on way too much authority, and the federal government by extension.
And that's why you see in the Confederacy Constitution how much it put power in states' hands. In fact, it even talks about like the opening preambles and like how's it go? They word it such that it's about the states. So the American Declaration or Constitution, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, yada yada yada. Whereas the Constitution was we the people of Confederate States, each state acting in its sovereign and independent character. So it was very much a focus on the states are in charge. We're all being buddy here, but each state is sovereign to itself.
Yeah.
And that's why, people will try and point out the Constitution of the Confederacy, say this proves that the Confederacy was all about slavery. Look how much it talks about slavery. And you got to understand that was the issue being debated in the U.S. government. And so when they broke off, they said, look, we have to address these issues now, and we have to be firm about it. So that's why they really focus so much on it. But if you look at the language of it, they had a lot of language in there that actually would have limited slavery. And at the same time, they had language in there that kept it strong.
Yeah.
It's fascinating when you look at the articles that people wanted to be in there and didn't get ratified. There were articles which very much you had people saying slavery is enshrined and protected forever. And that one was rejected because even though you had a faction of the South that really wanted to protect slavery because the people in power were the people that relied on the abuse of humans.
Yeah.
And then you also had people who also had power who said, no, this is not right. And so they put in language like Congress forbids the importation of black people. I mean, obviously they didn't use black people as the word, but they said it was Section 9, the importation of black people from any foreign country other than the slaveholding states and territories is forbidden. You were only allowed to have slaves within the states. And so this was a huge blow to slavery because it specifically prohibited bringing more slaves in. And it was designed to try and come to a solution whereby over time we could end this practice.
Yeah, it was.
But then
it was a slow burn instead of a heavy-handed burn.
It was, but then you turn around and just a few articles later, it talks about how Congress shall create no law denying or impairing the right of property of black slaves.
Yeah.
So you had these two factions, even in the South, fighting back and forth over this. And you see that reflected within the Constitution of the Confederacy.
Yeah. Well, it's very rare. I mean, in modern eyes, we tend to look at things as black and white. Good versus evil, right versus wrong. We like to pigeonhole ideas from the past into these categories. And we look back with those kind of goggles where, well, this was the right side, this was the wrong side, and that's how it was. When if you really dissect it, it never really is that simple.
Mm-hmm.
Ever.
Oh, we like to generalize things and simplify things.
Oversimplify to some degree.
Exactly.
So we have the powder keg that is the Civil War that starts off. How does it change throughout the war, or does it?
It certainly, as John already mentioned, it changed at Gettysburg, and it changed with the Emancipation Proclamation. That really turned it from just being a states' right issue into it's specifically about the right of slavery.
Okay.
Which, I mean, there are free black men in the South who fought for the Confederacy. And I would very much argue that they were not fighting for the right to keep slaves. I mean, it is true
No.
that there were black slave owners, which just shows you that people just want to be the person in charge.
Yeah.
People want to be the abuser, not the abusee.
Yes.
Right.
But at the same time, it also shows that at the very beginning, it wasn't about slavery, not in and of itself. Yes, it was a factor. And this is something that a lot of people kind of get stuck in their head. Like, well, how can it not be about slavery when the debate going on about states' rights was slavery? Well, yeah, I mean, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can have, it can be a multifaceted position.
Yeah.
And
there are many reasons why the guns were drawn. It's just a matter of which one do you want to talk about today.
Right.
Yeah, and so personally, I do try and focus on the fact that, yes, slavery was a factor, and it was an important factor. There was a lot of debate. That was the hot topic issue. I mean, imagine if abortion became the hot topic issue of every political debate, which I'm not going to make a stance on it. I don't know what anyone's opinion here is. I'm just saying, as a general, I know that's already a hot topic. But imagine if that became the hot topic debate. And it became such a hot topic debate that half of the country, or it became a huge hot topic debate, and at the same time, half the country left.
Yeah.
That would be very much written into the constitution of that new country, or the half of the states that left. They'd say, you know what, we are resolving this right here and right now. And so then all of a sudden it'd be like, well, clearly they seceded because of abortion. And be like, well, no. That was the hot topic. And so that was addressed within their constitution.
That was the match to lit powder keg, but it wasn't the powder keg.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we all know that the Union wins the war. How much at the time, from your research, how much at the time was it, we won, we ended slavery, as the modern battle cry is, and how much of it was a different perspective at the time, where now it's evolved to this is the war to end this?
I'm sure there was a group of abolitionists, for example, in the North, who looked at it as, yay, we fought a war to end slavery. But I imagine there were a lot of people, it was more important that they preserve the Union, and the end of slavery was just kind of like a bonus, if you will.
Yeah.
That is a good question. I'm honestly not too sure on that one.
Yeah.
I haven't really looked at that aspect of it.
Because because even with World War II, I mean, you look at it from what we declare at the time to what we declare now. They're similar, but they're not 100% the same. So it's
From a perspective, they shift, and
yeah.
Kind of on the flip side of that, I had some in-laws who had ancestors who fought for the Confederacy, and the way it was explained to me is that they never owned slaves. They couldn't have afforded them even if they wanted to, but they were fighting to preserve their homes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that did fight for the Confederacy, that's what they were doing. They were fighting for their land, their homes, people they knew.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was. You were fighting for what you believed in, for the most part, and in some cases, you were fighting because, well, you didn't have a choice in the matter. It was either do that or be seen as a traitor within your own community, which wouldn't go over very well either. So.
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways, you didn't have a choice in the matter.
But I think about Bird of Prey made a good point in the chat. He says, "I don't know if the death toll was worth the fight. I think slavery would have ended on its own within a couple of decades." I think it's probably true. And one thing I think most Americans don't think about is that historically, no other country had to fight a war to end slavery.
No.
And point in fact, we didn't fight a civil war to end slavery either.
Yeah, I know.
And I make that distinction because there are a lot of people who try and be like, "Oh, this is a reason to be ashamed of America's past because we're the only country that had to fight a war to end slavery."
Yeah.
And we didn't. It was already on its last legs. We fought our Civil War, 1861 to 1865, about that time frame. And like I said earlier, UK had ended its slavery in 1833. France had ended its slavery in, I believe it was the 1840s. And more countries were starting to say, you know what, this is wrong. And I think America would have, I think even the South, after they seceded and had put in the language protecting, like literally saying Congress shall enact no law ending slavery, they would have enacted a law ending slavery and people would have accepted it. Because
it would have. It's all by public opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But really, the issue was always about who has the power. Does the federal government have the power, or do states have the power? And yes, part of that was power over slavery. I think it's right and fair that we recognize that was an issue. But it was ultimately about who has the power. And in the South, people wanted that to remain within the Southern power, within the state's power. And even in the North, like I said earlier, Stephen Douglas, he was a huge proponent of states' rights. He absolutely and adamantly believed that issues should be decided by the states. And it wasn't the job of the federal government to dictate what those laws should be. Unfortunately, within his own party, which he was a Democrat, but within his own party, there was an increasing extremism toward federalism. And he actually tried to run for president twice before he got the nomination within the Democratic Party. So he finally got the ticket in 1860. But by then it was too late because he had tried in 1856 and 1852 as well, I want to say, to get the nomination. And he just couldn't get it because the Democrats were becoming exceedingly extremist toward federalism, it's funny I say extremist because by our standards, they would be so far right wing in terms of federal powers that you just gotta laugh about it. But for the day, they were, crazy pushing it toward federalism, and that really was the true agitating point of the Civil War: who had the power.
And so at the end of the Civil War, what really changes? Other than the main, other than the what we focus on that changed, what other changes that kind of, I guess, modernly get swept under the rug happened? So
I was wondering if maybe states had more clout than they did prior to the war,
or was it the opposite?
Or was it the opposite? Yeah,
I would
don't
say
know
it was
specifically.
more the opposite. That the states had less clout, especially the South, which got stuck with a bill for the Reconstruction. We did the same thing with Germany after World War One, where they lost and they got stuck with a bill, and unfortunately, that set things up for World War Two.
Yes,
there's a lot of hurt feelings. There was a lot of feeling oppressed, and it set up the stage. And in the same way, by sticking the bill with the South and saying, well, it was all the South's fault, that set the stage, I think, for a lot of the ongoing race relation issues that we have today. Because it turned it from being a the South that cares about the rights of the states into it's all about slavery. And
Yeah.
this was something Lincoln, he did it masterfully. He did it with his Emancipation Proclamation. And then once it was over, we signed the 13th Amendment. And that solidified the belief that the Civil War was all about slavery. When, as we've been discussing, it wasn't all about slavery.
Yeah, it was a talking point, but it wasn't the talking point.
Yeah.
It wasn't the beginning and the end. I think, from what I can gather from the conversation today, we like to look at things as a one topic issue, and we don't like to. Well, okay, yes, it was about this, but it was also about this other portion, and right or wrong, the smaller instances, taxation, states' rights, etc., get swept under the rug because it's easier to get the rally point behind this topic than it is these other ones.
That's why we have people. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
And that's why we have in the modern day people like wanting to pull down statues and saying certain flags are hateful because they don't understand the history behind them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Prime example of that, I threw up my hands, I think it was last year, a World War I monument that commemorated German dead was painted with swastikas. Vandalized with swastikas and down with the Germans and yada, yada, yada. It was a World War I monument. Yeah. People are not very bright. Wrong.
Because obviously
war.
that was the focal issue of World War One.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
Which, not to get into that, but I love what set off World War One. It was such an amazing set of coincidences where there was a failed attempt, and by complete accident, they walked into the pub where the king was, and they're like, "What?"
Yeah. The and what World War One boils down to nothing different than modern day. Germany had alliances and agreements. If someone declares war on you or you declare war on them, I will come to your aid.
Mm-hmm.
And France had the same agreements, and England had the same agreements, and Russia had the same agreements, and with different countries.
Yeah.
So all it was a giant powder keg, and all it was waiting for was somebody to light the match. And once somebody lit the match, the dominoes fell.
Yeah, and what should have been a small thing between two relatively small countries turned into a global affair.
Yes. Yeah.
Not that it really ties to the Civil War, but it's fascinating that how much we do tend to ignore the past. What you're talking about, the taking down of the graffitiing of the World War One monument.
Yeah. But again, you look at the Civil War, and you could argue that it's, there were many different opinions on different sides of the aisle. But once you start poking here and poking there and then poking here, and at some point, it's bound to explode.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, once you win that particular battle, it's usually written by the victors. So usually how they want to see it is how it is. It's usually how it goes. Welcome, Dr.
Yes, it's
Alex.
absolutely confirmed. I love assassinations and millions and dead. That's 100% what I was saying. You guys heard it online. You can't unhear that. That's the truth.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Yeah.
You've done it again, Matthew.
Oh,
That's why we love you.
But you're right. History is written by the victors, and in this case, the North was the victor, and the political thing to do was to make this about the Civil War, and they knew it. They knew that by framing this in, or make it about the Civil War, stupid Matt, make it about slavery, and by wrapping it within this framework, it changed the narrative from being the North was pushing aggression toward the South when they seceded. The North wanted the South back, and the North pushed aggression. Now, that didn't justify it. That was not a casus belli for the attack on Fort Sumter. I think the South absolutely was in the wrong for doing that. I think they panicked, and I do think that shows how much of a politician Lincoln was. He knew he didn't have a cause to war to go with the South, but he also knew he could get them to panic. He could make them flinch and blink, and that's exactly what happened, and that became his casus belli, his cause for war.
So this kind of leaves the scope, so if you don't know the answer, that's all right. But I'll ask it anyway. Let's fast forward past the Civil War. If Lincoln isn't shot, what do you think the rest of his presidency looks like? And do you think he has the same reputation he has now if he's not shot in that theater?
You're treading on dangerous path there.
I know, but that's my job.
I think that's an interesting question. I think that Lincoln proved himself to be an extremely shrewd politician. And I do think that while he personally did want to deport black people, I think he would have saw that as being political suicide after the Civil War. He did make this a black rights, black freedom issue.
Yeah.
With his Emancipation Proclamation with the 13th Amendment. So he was not in a position where he could have pushed for his actual heart desires.
Yeah.
I don't think. And I don't think he could have laid the groundwork for it either. So I think that even if he had lived, we would not have seen a huge shift in what actually played out. I think he was probably, he would have probably been a better president than his vice president was. Oh.
Okay.
Who was his vice? Was that Garfield?
Andrew Johnson.
Johnson, thank you. Who was Garfield? Garfield came after some other.
A cat.
He was later, I think.
He was someone else who only got there by not being elected. I forget who he superseded, but anyway, I think that we would have probably gotten some better policies in general, but I don't think we would have seen a huge shift the shape of the American landscape.
Okay. Plus, he still would have been reeling from the war and not wanting a second one.
Right.
All right. So with that, I think we'll draw this to a close. I will pass the floor to John and Life with Matthew to promote whatever they wish, and then we will. I will let Jeff do the same, and then I've got a couple of things, and then we'll get out of here. So, John, you go first.
Thanks. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the panel. I appreciate it.
Not a problem.
I have a channel where I do mostly Star Trek videos. I'm planning to release one this afternoon about how the warp drive effect in Star Trek has changed over the years. Also, on Fridays I do the questions for the Jeopardy on Salty Trekkers channel. So if you want to go check that out, we'd love to have you.
Awesome. And Life with Matthew.
So I will be doing a video with John tomorrow, finally continuing our review of Sequest. Look forward to that. And then today, around 4 p.m. Central, I'm going to be doing part 2 of my Overthinking Voyager, which I'm having a lot of fun doing this series. I started up last week. I'm going to release it every Monday at 4 in the afternoon, which I know that's shortly after Bird starts going, but that's really the only time that works conveniently throughout the week for me. And that's what I'm going to be doing for the foreseeable future on YouTube, doing those weekly reviews.
Awesome.
Terrific.
And Jeff Franklin.
Well, as many know, I am part of a group of people that put on a quiz show for Star Trek, and it's called A Question of Trek. And we go live on Sundays at 4:30 Eastern time. So if you love Star Trek, if you love game shows, if you want to be on the show, join us on our streams Sundays at 4:30 Eastern.
Awesome. It's always fun and entertaining, and poor Conti gets picked on too much. But he deserves it.
He loves it.
All right. So, and with me, I have this Friday, we have Mr. CCDV returning for more stories with Mr. CCDV. I believe we're going to go back into the war footing and talk about his service on Friday. Rambling Canuck, I'm going to try and do at least one live stream. I'm going to be starting a new show this week, so it should be interesting. I have to balance it because for some reason they've decided that the kids are doing schooling at home, so my son needs my computer in the afternoon, which is annoying. But whatever. So that's kind of going to slow things down this week. But other than that, Midway should be coming out by the end of this month. Also, I do want to mention there will be a special live stream on January the 22nd, which is a Saturday. It will be at 1 p.m. Central Time, and it will be Remembering Doom. It'll be the 1-year anniversary since we lost Doom, and we will have a live stream. I will have an open panel for the most part. Mrs. Doom will be here. I confirmed that the other week. So my goal is for us as a community to get together with Mrs. Doom and take her mind off the day. And maybe share some stories, share some laughs. And it's more importantly just to be there with Mrs. Doom on a day that is going to be rather hard for her. But yeah, Midway should be by the end of the month. I have to write it yet, but working on it this week. Also, I'd like to point out Mrs. Canuck returns to YouTube tonight on Mary's Game Room. Tonight at 6:30 Central, she will start up her game streams again. So looking forward to that. Also, this Saturday, she will be returning to her normal time slot on a Saturday, and Mark the Infinitely Tired will become Mark the Infinitely Bald. So this should be fun. So with that, I'm going to end this as I always do. Thank you, and good night.